Welcome to Otherworld. I'm your host, Jack Wagner. I'm really excited about this episode. It was one of the first stories I really wanted to do for this show when I began first coming up with the idea for Otherworld. So I've been thinking about it for a long time and trying to get the storyteller to talk about it for a long time. This episode is a really important one to me because I think it's going to touch on some themes that will serve as a big step forward for certain people in opening their mind to these topics, or at least providing a good framework for people to how to look at the paranormal and to interpret these stories. Everyone's had good or bad times in their life, but generally speaking, most people are fortunate enough to never have to go through a real horrible tragedy. They don't have to experience that ever. I mean, the type of thing that's so bad or hard that your friends can't even give you advice about it. They can't even pretend to understand how you feel. The type of thing that they don't make books about how to get through. That type of bad. Most people just don't have to go through something like that, thankfully. They never have anything like that happen to them. But anyone who has gone through something like that knows how it changes you. It changes how you look at everything, and it makes you realize how fragile life is, and how it can all really fall apart in an instant and take you to a place that there's no fully going back from. When you go through that, it's not that it makes it easier to believe in the paranormal. I think it's just that it makes you realize how little we all know, and how lots of us just walk around as if we know everything. And when you go through something like that, it kind of changes the way you look at people. And you start to recognize that type of person and how foolish that type of person really is. The person that thinks they know everything. Because you really don't. You really don't. Even if you are just talking about what's going to happen to you next. What I'm trying to say is, everyone's reality and lived experience is very different. You never know what somebody else has gone through or how little you've gone through yet yourself. This story is from a person who's gone through a lot. I want to thank him for telling me this story because I know it's something that's very difficult to talk about. I think you guys are going to really like this story. It's not a scary one, but it's a very powerful one, and I'm very grateful to have it. This episode is called My Brother's Keeper. It's episode 8, and you're listening to Otherworld.
Hello?
Is this Bobby?
Yes, it is.
You still rolling?
Yeah, let us know when you're ready.
Okay.
So feel free to ask some questions.
Can you tell me...
Samoa and the Pacific Islands get pretty superstitious.
This is a story about...
It just comes out like that.
I'm John, and this happened when I was 13. I had my older brother, Andy. He was someone that I looked up to my whole life, and he was really cool. We would always do things together, and he was 18, and I was 13, so there was a 5-year difference. But growing up, as a young kid, I always thought he was, super cool. And even from the time I was a real little kid, he kind of never got annoyed with me. He always kind of included me under his wing. He would bring me on dates, first dates that he was going on with girls, and, telling them that my mom, made him take me. But we had worked out a code, and so if he didn't like the date or it wasn't going well, I would cause, trouble for him to be I have to take him home, I'm sorry. But he's also the one that kind of just really got me into music, growing up with, an older brother like that, was great. We would do kind of weekly movie nights, especially once, we got older and he got in high school in his senior year, he was really busy, so we didn't hang out as much, but he made sure that, once a week, we would, go do something together. And so it was often movies. This happened back, I was 13, so 97. Me and him were on our way to a movie, and we got into a car accident, hit by a drunk driver. And then, next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. I remember a lot of confusion, not knowing where I was. It was kind of like, waking up in that fight or flight mode. From what I was told, the first time I woke up, they had to sedate me right away just because, I was panicking. And then, next time it was just kind of, waking up, but just really groggy, confused. And this was like the first time I woke up was about like 2 or 3 days after the accident. In that day, like I have little kind of like bursts of memory. Like I just, remember kind of, seeing people I didn't know people coming in and talking to me, but just, my memory of them talking to me is kind of like the Charlie Brown like teachers, where it was just kind of, sounds like a, trombone, where I see them talking but cannot understand anything they're saying. I feel worn out, like I'm confused, I'm hurt, like I'm just gonna close my eyes, and then, when I wake up, like it'll be completely different. Like, this is just a dream, like, let me sleep and, wake up again and everything will be fine type thinking. I knew I was injured, I felt pain. I was, laying down. I wasn't like propped up, so it wasn't like look down and see. So I had pain in my leg. I didn't think that it was gone because I could still feel it. It felt, I had a cast on my other leg, but, they felt pretty similar, like in terms of pain level. To me, until they said something, I didn't realize it, and then I think it was like the doctor that was kind of, was explaining kind of my injuries and how serious they were and having to amputate. And, that was, I think, when it kind of really started kind of sinking in, like, wait, what? And then finding out that, oh, what I'm feeling, like, that's just, that's what's called phantom pain. Like, even though it feels like the leg's there, like it's not. It's just, my brain, playing tricks and, the nerves not knowing how to handle it and kind of sending different signals to the brain. When I did, realize it and found out, that was super overwhelming. And that's probably one of the first times that, I kind of really just freaked out and just couldn't handle things. And they had to sedate me because, heart rate was going up and, I was just kind of panicking. As a kid, I played, soccer on the travel soccer teams and, was pretty active. So, finding out that, I lost my leg, it was just like, well, what's going to happen now? Like, I can't do what I used to do. So yeah, that was an adjustment. This isn't a dream. Like, this is real. This is something that's actually happening. So when I woke up that first night, like, I knew it was kind of, more of night, because things were kind of dark, the lights were lower, but it was a lot quieter, which was nice. Things, were a little better to allow me to just kind of, come to terms and think about like everything going on. And when I was doing that, I looked over and saw Andy sitting next to me. And, that made me feel even more at ease, knowing that he was there and, time thinking that, oh, everything's going to be okay. Like, Andy's here. He's, with him around, like, I'm definitely going to, get through this all. He's always been the person who I looked up to. So, he'll help me through all this. This is just, one hump in life to get over. And so, I saw him there and turned and looked at him and, he looked at me and, he was just like, I know you're scared, but, everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be all right. And, I kind of repeated that to myself and, we just kind of, I don't remember fully everything we talked about, but, I know it was just kind of like general chit chat, just kind of, calming and, him sitting down, sitting there in, t-shirt and shorts. And it was the first time I really felt at ease. And first time I really thought to myself, well, maybe things are kind of going to be okay. The next day, like my parents were in the hospital visiting. Andy is probably at school, because my sister wasn't around, my youngest sister. So I thought, oh, they're probably at school. And so it was just a lot of kind of, general talk with my parents. It was harder with my mom around because, my mom was kind of, crying and, freaking out. And so that was just kind of giving me anxiety too. So I just remember just wanting more to kind of be by myself. There was just that little like bitter thought, like, I'm the one that's going through this. Like, why are you taking this so hard? Like with my mom's kind of reaction to everything. And so I remember like just wanting to be more kind of alone. And they were probably there for most of the day. So it was probably around dinner time that they left. And then again, that night when I woke up, middle of the night, Andy was there. And, he was wearing the same outfit. But again, it was the same kind of chat that, him telling me, everything's going to be fine. Like, everything's going to be okay. You'll get through this. Like, you're strong. I remember, asking him, is he okay? What exactly happened in the accident? How did he kind of make it out, and him just giving general, like just real general answers, not really answering the question, when asking him like how he's doing, him saying that, he's just more concerned with how I'm doing. I think I might have asked him like, where he was that day, why he, hadn't come in, to visit later, why he's only been coming in at night to visit. Yeah, the questions were never answered. It was just the kind of, his answers were dancing around, and kind of coming back to him talking about just wanting to make sure I'm okay. After, we talked a bit, just kind of laying there, in like comfortable silence and, falling asleep, waking up that next day. Later, it was probably around lunchtime that my parents came in again and asking them like, oh, why hasn't Andy been visiting with you? Like, and when I first asked that, like, they just kind of looked at each other, but didn't say anything. And I was just like, well, why has he been coming at night? Like, why can't you all come in and visit together, instead of separately? And, that's when my dad kind of, was just like, wait, what did you say? Like, what are you talking about? And I explained about Andy coming at night, and talking to me. And I wish like he could come during, the day with my parents. And that's when, my mom kind of broke down. And that's when, my dad had said like, no, like that's not possible. Like Andy died in the accident. Like that's why he hasn't been here. And, that's when things just, to me, in my mind, got just so super confusing. It's just like, well, no, like, that's not true. Like, he's been here visiting. Like, we've talked. And I just kind of, broke down. Like, I was kind of panicking. Like, that was the second time that I really had to be sedated. Just because it was just way too much and so overwhelming. And so that's, the next time I really remember is kind of the day after that. My dad, it was just my dad visiting. My mom wasn't there. And, he had talked to me and, explained more about what happened and showed me a newspaper, talking about how, like, Andy had passed away. It just wasn't kind of clicking. Like, I, saw that and thought, okay. But then it was just like, but no, he was visiting me. And so it was just like, part of me accepted it, but then part of me didn't. Because it's just like, I know what I experienced, and I know that I talked to him, but, realizing that, well, the things that we talked about and the things that he had said and that mantra that he would always tell me, like, that kind of helped me go on and thinking like, well, I got this second chance. Like, I need to kind of push through what's happening. I need to get through this, so I can live for myself, but then also make Andy proud. Because that's what he would want me to do. Like, he wouldn't want me just to, sit and dwell and just be unhappy about life. Because that's what he would pretty much say. Like, everything's going to be fine. Like, everything's going to be okay. Like, you can do this. So just remembering that is kind of what helps set the pace for kind of like moving forward, and kind of getting through it all. After that, it was just a lot of, I was probably in the hospital a total of like 2.5 months, but it was just a lot of kind of, healing and just kind of, mentally moving forward. And then, there's a lot of kind of physical therapy, and, that's when the mantra really kind of came back with Andy's words about kind of when doing physical therapy, everything's going to be fine, just kind of keep going. Nowadays, like, there's so much more visibility with, people who are disabled or amputees. Whereas, back then, like, for the longest time, I didn't know anyone else that was like me, missing a limb. Like, so it was definitely like hard because I didn't have anyone that I could be like, oh, they know how I'm feeling. They know what I'm going through. When I have told a few people, people often say, well, you did have a head injury. So, and that it was, your imagination or just, your consciousness trying to kind of cope with what was going on. But so it's always been kind of all these different kind of answers, kind of, that people have used to try and explain, when I've told them about, I know what happened to me. Like, this is my experience. Like, part of my mind says, like, you trying to take that away from me, it's just like you trying to kind of take that, like, hope, and those words that you would say to me at night that I kind of made my kind of philosophy, like, you're trying to take that away. Like, I thought you were a friend type thing, and I know they don't mean it in that way, but sometimes it's hard not to take it that way. I realized that, he was kind of giving me what I needed when I needed it. So in a way, like, he was always there and always with me, when I would just kind of think back on that phrase and that mantra that kind of became my mantra. Yeah, I mean, there were times where, I would swear that I would see, at different moments, different times, like, where I would swear I would see him kind of like, in the distance, but knowing like, oh, that's just someone who looked like him, or, that's just, my imagination, but it wasn't like, oh, he's there, he's around. It was just kind of little moments where it's just kind of like, in a way, I think it might have been like little reminders that, hey, I'm still around. You're not in this alone.
All right, Jack here. I just thought I'd jump in and talk for a second because even though I love this story, it's amazing, that part that he just talked about really frustrates me. When he mentioned these people that he would tell about this experience, he'd tell them about the experience, and their first instinct is to question it or say that it's not real. That is so weird to me. And I think it's it's a weird reaction, and I think it's an arrogant reaction. These people know nothing about this person or what he's gone through. He's gone through so much more than they could ever even imagine, probably more than they'll ever even go through in their life. And it's so strange to immediately question this person's lived experience, let alone say that it's not real, because at a certain point, how would you even define that? Because it sounds pretty real to me. It sounds actually probably one of the most real things that's ever happened to John, if I had to take a guess. And, he lost his leg, he lost his own brother, and his family got torn apart. And he had this amazing experience and an opportunity to see his brother a couple more times. I mean, it's so weird to be a person that, like, your first instinct is to try to take that away from him in some way. It's very weird. And there are people like that. And I think part of the reason I'm doing this show is to try to get rid of that instinct. Even if you're skeptical about something, you could definitely keep that to yourself. Because sometimes it's a really stupid thought. You sound like an idiot. I've talked to John at length about this, and, he's talked to me about the times in the hospital that were very blurry to him and confusing. And then, of course, the times where he would wake up and be very clear-headed, including the times that he visited his parents during the day. And he said that these visits with Andy were very much clear-headed, waking experiences. He would wake up very lucid, and this would happen. He knows it's real. That no part of him thinks this was some kind of weird dream. But you know what? Even if it was, who cares? I don't think it matters. It's a person's lived experience, and this is a very important one to him. So I just wanted to drive that point home. I mean, this is an amazing, amazing story, but I think another important point of it is that I think we really need to adjust the way we look at people's lived experience, and especially the way people are very, very quick to give their uninvited personal opinions about it. So I'm going to let John continue on with the story, but I just wanted to say that.
Getting out of the hospital definitely made it seem a lot more real. Because now it's just like, oh, you're in the real world. Trying to get back to how things were. It was definitely kind of more of an adjustment and became more real, moving around the real world and not just, the hospital where, especially with like physical therapy, they make things, easier and more comfortable for you. So I think that's when, the full and real adjustment to everything kind of started. And then the family had moved to Iowa. It was like a way to kind of start over. In a way, like, that was good because I didn't have, people who knew me my whole life, and now, after the accident, seeing me different, moving to Iowa, people just seeing me how I was then and not knowing everything, and pitying or asking questions, or people who didn't quite know about the accident asking things like, how my brother's doing, so in a way it was kind of nice to have that fresh start. I always felt that he must be watching over me, just because I couldn't see him doesn't mean he isn't around. So I was kind of felt that, no matter what, he was still there for me, having kind of, those down moments or, depression about anything, I always kind of used the idea and, his memory as kind of strength to kind of pick me back up again. I got a second chance at life, and so it's just like, I want to live it to the fullest for me, but also for him. So years later, I was engaged to this girl, and she dealt with bipolar, and I didn't realize at the time, but she had gone off her meds. I had been at work all day, and I'd come home and found her just sitting on the couch. And TV was on, but volume down. I could tell that something was kind of on her mind. Something was going on, and she is bipolar, and so I thought, she must be kind of dealing with, a downward turn in terms of her feelings. And so, I had asked her what was going on. And she had told me that earlier in the day, she, when going to the gas station, just went into a really downward manic episode. And, all she could think about was just walking into traffic. And she said that she went to take a step and then kind of felt someone grab her and pull her back on the sidewalk, and looked around and saw this kid, who was kind of like, a late teen. And she started describing the kid in person. And I was just like, kind of got me thinking, because then the description sounded really familiar. Then when she said the what he was wearing, a blue t-shirt that said Jinx on it. I was kind of got my blood running cold in a way, because it was just, I felt like I knew who it was that helped her. And so Jinx was the school that me and my brother, and also my sister, had gone to when we lived in Philly. And this took place in Delaware. Like, me and my fiance were living in Delaware at the time. So, the chances of someone else wearing a Jinx shirt, I think, would be very slim. So, she had said that, she went, and turned around to say thanks to the person, and the person wasn't there anymore, and she couldn't see where he went. So, next time we were at my parents' house, we went into the basement, and went through boxes, that had family photos, and found a picture of my brother and showed it to her, and her face just got kind of pale, and she got quiet, and she kind of looked, and she said that was who she saw, that, she just couldn't understand, like, how that picture of my brother, who she hadn't seen a picture of before, she got super confused on how that could have been the person who really saved her. My parents' way of dealing with the trauma and everything, losing a brother was hard. I can't imagine losing a child. But my parents' way of dealing with it was to kind of remove, the family photos that he was in. She had never seen pictures of him because there weren't any pictures up around the house. So when we went into the basement, looking through the boxes to find some of the photos, when I found the photo and showed it to her, it was the first time she had seen a picture of my brother. At the time, just the kind of look of shock on her face when she saw the photo, is what made me believe her. Because I don't think someone can be like that good of an actor, in that moment. She, was saying things that, it just proves that, he's still here looking out for you, and looking out for those around you, including her now. Philosophically, like, I've gotten to the point where, especially now that it's been like, 25 years later, where I know that, like, I trust my own experiences. I trust myself. I know myself, like, I know myself. I know what I saw. I know what I've been through, so if someone, has an issue with me or with anything, like sharing an experience, well, that's their issue. I talk to people who are kind of like, naysayers, or just like, oh, that couldn't have happened, or, oh, you must have imagined it. But just trying to kind of diminish accomplishments too, people are always just kind of, gonna often put other people down, or kind of doubt other people just so they can feel better about themselves type thing. And just in, the grand scheme of things, this experience isn't even like, a big part, of everything. Like, it's something I went through. It's something that helped me. But, in terms of everything I've gone through with life, with kind of losing my leg and just dealing with everything, now doing, my own, working hard to do my own art full time. There's just been so many other, like, bigger things that, in a way, that have happened in my life. So it's just kind of funny that people kind of, in a way, doubt, something that helped me, and just kind of a small part when there's bigger things that I've kind of done and, gone through and dealt with that I would think would be more attention grabbing in a way. But yeah, I don't know. I can honestly say, like, I've never actually sat and thought about, like, what this was. Like, to me, it was just, an experience and something that I had, but I've never actually, like, thought, oh, how did this happen? Or, what was this that was happening? What I went through was a lot. Like, it was stuff that I wouldn't wish on, people I hate, or an enemy. Like, if I didn't have that support, like, I don't know where I would be now, or if I would be here now. Like, so with people who are kind of skeptical or naysayers, I just kind of remind myself, like, they never went through what I went through. They haven't gone through even anything similar. So, of course, they can't understand it, or kind of empathize with how I feel. So it's just like, I just kind of take comfort in the fact that, like, I went through this, I survived this, like, I was stronger, and I was stronger, in part by what happened.
All right. Thank you, John, so much for telling us that story. I know it was really difficult one to talk about, so really thank you for telling us that. That was incredible. One of my favorite stories. Not all of these paranormal stories need to be bad or scary. That was a really nice one. Probably some of you needed that after the last few episodes. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I hope it had some good lessons in there to be learned, because I think the way people react to these topics is not so great sometimes. And part of what I'm doing with this show is to hopefully open people's minds a little bit, or at least help them understand and maybe learn a framework of looking at this stuff, or even just accepting and understanding that people have gone through stuff that you could never understand or never know. Everybody has had a very, very different lived experience. And a lot of the most intense stuff that they've gone through, they're not going to talk about with you. They might not talk about with anybody. It might be something that they keep secret. So it's just worth keeping that in mind when you think about running your mouth about how much you know about somebody else's lived experience. And especially if you're going to talk about their life as if you know about it better than them. So something worth considering when moving through the world and talking to people, especially when it comes to talking to somebody else about their own personal lived experience, and perhaps not invalidating that to the people that you meet. So, with that being said, that brings us to the end of this episode. Once again, I want to thank John for telling us that story, and I also want to officially dedicate this episode to the memory of John's brother, Andy. On behalf of Otherworld, rest in peace, Andy. And thank you, John, so much for telling us that story. My name is Jack Wagner. This episode is called My Brother's Keeper, and you've been listening to Otherworld. Otherworld is executive produced and hosted by myself, Jack Wagner. Our theme song is by Cobra Man. The soundtrack of this episode is by North Americans. Editing and engineering by Theo Schaefer. The artwork for our show is by Cul-de-sac Studios. Once again, this is an independent show, so please show us your support by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and telling your friends. If you want to follow us on social media, we're at Otherworld Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Also, if you or somebody you know has experienced something paranormal, supernatural, or unexplained, you could send us your story at stories@otherworldpod.com. Folks, one more thing. If you liked this episode, please help me out by spreading the word. Tell your friends about Otherworld. Leave us a review. It's been helping a lot. The show's been growing, which has been super exciting to see, but still needs to get bigger. So please help me out, and thank you so much for helping me out already.